So this week, Lael Brainard, who is a Federal Reserve Board of Governor, she has done a 180 from her position in September of 2018. So if you go back and look through the archives, or my loyal podcast listeners will know, I did a short video and live stream show on this in September, talking about how Lael Brainard, this is a Market Watch article by Steve Goldstein. I went back and looked through the article because I wanted to be precise and exact about this, that Lael Brainard said that the Federal Reserve would not care if it continued to further invert the yield curve, and that they would continue with further rate hikes, and that they would continue with quantitative tightening. Well, this week she basically did a 180. And so in an exclusive interview and comments, I guess, with CNBC, this is a Thursday, it came out on Valentine's Day, February 14th article on Zero Hedge, but it's a CNBC exclusive. It says Brainard becomes first FOMC member to urge ending of the balance sheet by the end of 2019. So sometime over the past year, Fed Governor Lael Brainard shifted from one of the biggest hawks and Clinton donors, in parenthesis, on the FOMC to a dove, one which, according to the latest BNP hawk-dove scale, is on par with the Chicago Fed's Charlie Evans. However, as of this morning, when the article was written, every such FOMC distribution scale may have no choice but to put Brainard left of both Fed underdoves. Okay, this is just a bunch of rankings of Fed governors of bullish or dovish. You can look at this in the article. After she became the first Fed member to signal she favors ending the process of Fed balance sheet unwind sometime in 2019, roughly a year sooner than the buy-side and dealer consensus expects the Fed to taper its QT. Quote, in my view, that balance sheet normalization process probably should come to an end later this year, end quote, Brainard said in a CNBC on Tuesday. CNBC interview. I guess the Zero Hedge writer here made some grammar mistakes. Quote, we want to have an ample supply of reserves, quote, Brainard added. She continues, quote, we've taken some surroundings from the market in terms of what that demand for reserves is, and I'd want to have a substantial buffer on top of that to avoid volatility, end quote. So my interpretation of this is that the Fed is really, really scared of asset price volatility for a bunch of different reasons I've been talking about for months now on my live stream shows and my interviews, that the Fed is just really, really panicked about the stock market falling and staying down there. One of the main reasons, like I said, is due to U.S. capital gains tax revenue for the Treasury. So if capital, and that's one of the reasons why the Fed intervened so much during the 2008 financial crisis, is the Treasury Department lost so many long side capital gains taxes for stocks, bonds, and real estate. Okay, let me continue here. While being the first to provide calendar guidance, end quote, Brainard did not present a level for where she believed the overall balance sheet or bank reserves should settle. As a reminder, they're currently at roughly $1.5 trillion. That's for the bank reserves, and expected to shrink to $1 trillion by early mid-2020. So the thing is, most people who say that QE is not inflationary don't understand how the banking system fully operates, and how reserves, even if they're docked at the Fed, can be used as collateral for all kinds of other investments or loans or bets that the banks make all over the globe in different asset markets and the over-the-counter derivatives market. You know, basically, once the banks have more collateral, it can be used for a plethora of other things. If you don't believe me about this, go and listen to the interviews from Nomi Prinz. She was a managing director at Goldman Sachs and also Bear Stearns, and she and I have had discussions about this in prior interviews over the years, and she also talks about this in her other interviews on other channels. So that's directly from a Wall Street insider, someone who is at the very high end of the spectrum there and is actually willing to be honest. Okay, CNBC's Steve Leisman observed Brainard's comment, quote, is potentially big news. Brainard said she wants the wind down to end later this year. The CNBC Fed survey market average was Q1 2021. So that's more than a year earlier, perhaps implying a bigger balance sheet, end quote. So if you want to read more of the article, you can take a look there. But basically, the Fed is worried now that they did too many rate hikes and too much QT, and that because of how much debt and leverage is in the system, whether it's the U.S. corporate bond market, the global economy, emerging markets, European banks, I mean, we could just go down the list of way too much credit, way too much leverage in the global economy. I call them economic landmines. The Fed is worried that they've already triggered the next crisis. Okay, so I just wanted to bring that to you guys' attention. This is going to be a shorter show. So I forgot to bring up a very important point on the last live stream show, and I hear this from a lot of my libertarian friends and even my listeners to the show that comment, libertarians in general do not have any political power. It is really sad. There should be a stronger third party or four parties or more than two parties here in the United States. We do not have strong third and fourth and multi-party system, and the system is rigged that way. So both political parties, the banks and the military-industrial complex, and special interest groups from other governments. I mentioned the three main governments that have control, both political parties, foreign governments that do. And so there's all these, Monsanto and all these other large corporations that have control pretty much basically the two main political parties. But in my opinion, this is based on the stuff I've been doing, my activism, and what I think a good American libertarian or a foreign libertarian, and you want to help the U.S., try to save the U.S. from collapse. Although I'm going to do, like I said, that video on socialism. I have the slide deck done, so I need to just record the audio. But what a good libertarian should really do is just call out the fraud, the lying, the corruption, the hypocrisy from both main political parties. So, for your friends and family, on your social media, some people are going to think you're crazy, but if you can wake up one person, it will maybe red pill one person, and then that person will maybe red pill another, and you'll start to get maybe a positive feedback loop and a chain reaction. But at this stage of the game, that's basically, as a libertarian, the only type of power we have, is to influence the people around us that we love and care about, that we want to protect, and maybe wake up a couple people here or there. And in my opinion, since we do not have any real political power, the best way to accomplish this is through, just enlightening people about how lying, corrupt, cheating, hypocritical both major political parties are. Okay? Republicans and Democrats. And how both political parties have enormous amounts of responsibility for getting the U.S. to the levels of debt and all the other problems in American society where we are right now. So that's all we can really do as libertarians. Unfortunately, a lot of libertarians, the more I met them, especially a lot of the rich and successful ones that you guys see on YouTube, a lot of them are lazy and dishonest. I can't name names. I don't want to get sued, but because I've had bad business dealings and other stuff, but I know some of them on a personal level, and they are nowhere near as good a people as you think. They will totally screw someone over for like a couple $1,000s, or totally lie and cheat and steal. A lot of them. It's really sad. So, a lot of people think that libertarians should be more moral, should know better, but a lot of libertarians are not as good as their public image. It is really sad. And I think that's part of why the libertarians really don't have as much political power as they should. The Libertarian Party has been a disaster. Ron Paul has left it. A lot of the Libertarian Party hates the Ludwig von Mises Institute crowd. One of the higher-ups in the Libertarian Party was unprovoked attacking Tom Woods. So I think we just have to call out, if you are a libertarian, I know not everyone who listens to this podcast is libertarian. It's investors and traders who are just looking for market insights. But if you are a libertarian and you care about maybe fixing things in the U.S., the best thing you could do, your vote's not going to really count too much. You have to try to wake people up with the right information and education. And that's exposing the hypocrisy, the corruption, and the lies of the two-party political system, and how both political parties are rotten and corrupt to the core. Hello, Tortoise. That's an interesting comment. Libertarians focus on free drugs and prostitution too much. They shoot themselves in the foot. Well, I also think that a lot of libertarians focus on very sophisticated things, and the average person is not going to spend hours and hours and hours watching lectures on the Mises Institute. They probably won't even read a beginner's economics book like Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. So there has to be a more efficient way to deliver the content. Now, I know some of these channels like Foundation for Economic Education are trying to make like 10-minute videos. When the Black Panther movie, pretty soon after that, they did like an economic analysis of that video, and I think it got a lot of views. So there are ways to start like waking people up, but yes, the message to wake more people up, the Libertarian Party and a lot of libertarians have not done a good job of this. Peter says, Jason, the entire U.S. political system is a mess, a giant swamp. This legislation that Trump just passed for the border wall is a disaster. It will just legalize tens of millions of illegals. Well, I mean, he wanted a win. He wanted to win. He didn't want another government shutdown. But what most people don't understand is that number one, the voting process is pretty much rigged for the most part. There's not a lot of change. And even if people do vote for change and change candidates come to D.C., they're hijacked or blocked. So the change candidates that come to D.C., they will be offered money deals. And basically, if they play ball with the right people in D.C., they can go from being like a 420, I'll just use Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So she came to D.C. with like a 420 credit score, in debt up to her eyeballs, could barely pay any of her bills. I think like she could barely pay any of her bills. And, you know, she's a champagne socialist, and I don't know when she's going to leave Congress, but she already has a $3,000 a month apartment in a very posh new area of Washington, D.C. in the Navy Yard right next to Nats Park there, that there's like dozens of construction cranes knocking down all the old buildings and building luxury condos and new restaurants and new shopping malls and all that stuff, luxury apartments and condos. But basically, by the time Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leaves Congress, she's going to be worth at least way over $5 million, even in like 5 to 7 years. But I think, you know, she'll probably stick around longer than that, and she'll be worth like tens of millions, over $10 million in a short amount of time. So what most Americans do not understand is how much power the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. metro area has over everything. So they can choose. Just because, number one, Congress is broken, but if Congress actually passed good legislation, or the president is on a very dangerous precedent here, Republican or Democrat, for decades now, with these executive orders and national emergencies, I'm truly scared about the future presidents that come after Trump and all the future executive orders and national emergencies that are going to be passed, because it is going to get to like Roman emperor, end of the Roman Empire stages of ridiculous like executive decrees, which is part of the stuff that, Rome collapsed for a lot of different reasons, but there were so many like basically executive decrees from the Roman emperor, and there were so many coups and all this stuff. And Andrew McCabe admitted to a coup on a national interview. He admitted to a soft coup attempt, and I don't think he's going to go to prison. Why? Because the Department of Justice, I've been here for almost 20 years, and I have not met. I've been to charity events, networking stuff, parties, dating apps. I've met tons of Department of Justice attorneys, either online on social media or in person, and I really have never met a single Department of Justice attorney who is Republican, pro-Trump, or libertarian. Okay, it is like, what's the right word? Confirmation bias. They only hire a certain type of resume, a certain type of political creature for those agency jobs, those types. And until that changes, the system won't change. It doesn't matter in a lot of ways what the voter votes for, because the bureaucrats can delay or not implement a lot of the policy. And a lot of them won't get fired for it. So there's ways that a bureaucrat in the right position, a manager or something like that, if they have the right employee union protection, can delay implementation of laws. Look, there was, I think, tens of billions of dollars allocated, this is an example, for a wall like 4 or 5 years ago in past administrations. I think even the Obama administration, there was $20 billion that was supposed to have been allocated towards building walls, right? Because remember, at one point, a lot of Democrats were in favor of it. Well, where did that money go? I think a lot of that money was moved around by the different bureaucratic agencies and funneled into different Democrat social programs. Okay, it's the people, the insiders who work the system is so corrupt, so big. So there's a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability in the bureaucracy that, you know, $1 billion, hundreds of millions, even like a couple million or tens of millions of dollars being lost or stolen or misappropriated, that's not even that big a deal anymore relative to billions of dollars going missing. Look at the Pentagon and the 21 trillion, okay? That's a massive number. But, I mean, DC on a regular basis, like $1 billion is lost or stolen or unaccounted for. It's routine here. And this is not something that can be, I'm trying to think of the right words here. This is not something that is sustainable. You cannot, it's like the law of a complex system. Doug Casey talked about this in his speeches at the Capitalism and Morality Conference, which is online for free on YouTube. You can watch them. And he talks about the law of thermodynamics, that eventually these large complex systems require way too much energy to maintain. And there's just so much corruption and inefficiency and misallocation of capital. We're in the tens of trillions of dollars of misallocation of capital globally. The US has lots of trillions of dollars of misallocation of capital. China has lots of misallocation of capital. Europe is a goddamn disaster. Sorry, I shouldn't cuss. Europe is a disaster. European Union is a disaster. So we're reaching the limits here unless the people in power change the rules again. But the people are starting to wake up. Now, I don't know if everyone's going to go to pitchforks, but we're reaching dangerous levels of extremism and violence. R.N. Rousseau says we need the national emergency because of the corruption. Rome is burning. So this national emergency may temporarily fix some of the immigration problems, but like I said, it's going to set a dangerous precedent going forward. Whoever the next person is, if it's a crazy, like the most socialist, the most radical Democrat that checks off all the identity politics boxes, that is a total puppet for Bernie Sanders. By the way, Bernie Sanders has been funding people that will copy his exact policies in a younger generation. So he has handpicked people that are younger than him, that are like minorities and women who will spread his message. So puppets of Bernie Sanders and the other socialists, and there will be someone more radical than Trump on the other side, and it will the national emergencies and the executive orders will come back to bite everyone later. This is why I've been saying for a long time, inflation and taxes is the new normal. If you look at the Chapwood Inflation Index, which is free, you can go look it up. I would bookmark it. If you live in a major U.S. city or in the metro area, you've been suffering from real inflation or stagflation in all your consumer bills, 7 to about 12% annual inflation rate for a decade. That means if it's a 7% inflation rate, the rule of 72, you divide 72 divided by 7, so about every 10 years, the prices are going to double, or your standard of living is going to be cut in half. So not hyperinflation yet, but stagflation is bad too. And obviously, the cost of living adjustments, the CPI, the government's not reflecting any of this stuff here. Okay, so I've covered pretty much, okay, I wanted to read you a couple more things I put in the Wall Street for Main Street Facebook group. So, the asset prices may go a lot higher, but the stock market may go higher, but none of this is fundamental based, and it may get even more divorced from reality. So an updated list now of notable companies that have already lowered their guidance for the rest of 2019. Long list, so get ready. Apple, Samsung, LG, Delta, Skyworks, Macy's, Kohl's, American Airlines, Constellation Brands, Goodyear, Ford, Stanley Black & Decker, Intel, Nvidia, 3M, NetApp, Activation Blizzard, Twitter, Under Armour, Shopify, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Mattel. And don't worry, the plunge protection team Trump, the Trump and dump, and the powers that be will still try to move the major stock market indices higher, no matter what the fundamentals are. Welcome to dystopia. It's the new normal. I also encourage you, and this just came out too, it's in the link of the videos in the Wall Street for Main Street Facebook group. Jeff Gundlach gave a 20-minute exclusive interview this week to Yahoo Finance. So he's in there talking about how much debt in the U.S. corporate bond market has to be rolled over in the next 2 years, and it is a massive amount of debt. Massive. I think it's over $700 billion has to be rolled over in just the next 2 years in the U.S. corporate bond market. And how basically U.S. federal government, the Trump's government has lied about how much the debt has grown in the last 12 months. And Gunlock, unlike a lot of people that are predicting more of an inverted yield curve, Gunlock thinks the yield curve will steepen and that the 30-year Treasury could get to 4% in the next 12 to 18 months, 4% yield. And he thinks that could really start to blow things up. Now, Gunlock's a very smart guy. We'll have to see. And that's kind of remember I asked Kevin Duffy that question about how different experts in the bond market are, some of them are saying that the yield curve will go inverted, much worse than it is, or a flattening yield curve now, or whether Jeff Gunlock, he agreed with Gunlock and that the yield curve was steepened. And rather than necessarily answer that question, what Kevin Duffy said was that the bond markets would be a lot more focused on the balance sheets and the cash flow statements and the leverage ratios of individual corporations and companies and like sectors and industries. So he said that the companies that already had too much credit would be punished, and he said he didn't want to make a prediction on the yield curve in the bond markets. So I think that was an interesting response from Kevin, and that may be the right way to think about things, that rather than gamble on what the yield curve is going to do, because a lot of hedge fund managers are doing that Kevin is more focused bottom up, looking for companies or sectors that have way overextended themselves and are about to get their credit rating downgraded, like General Electric. Okay, well, that's pretty much it for this, the content I wanted to do on the short video. So I'm going to take a look at listener questions and comments, and then I'm going to be out of here. Healthy, Wealthy, and Stealthy. Funny name. Hello? Where are you listening to the live stream from? US or another country? Peter says hello from Australia. I would like to visit Australia one day. Good day, mate. Hopefully I said that all right. My ex-girlfriend, who was an Australian exchange student, did not like the Australian accent when I tried to do it. She said my British accent was better. I try to be the best, Watchman. Thank you. I appreciate your kind words. Tortoise62 says, should we be surprised the government cannot continue spending while the Fed continues to destroy money supply? Peter Schiff has predicted this for a long time. Well, yeah, Peter Schiff is a very good Austrian economist. Him and I totally disagree on China. But the problem with Austrian school economics, one of the main problems, is the timing thing. So Austrians are normally right in the long term, but they tend to not be good on the timing part. So talking with professional money managers and hedge fund managers who believe in Austrian school economics, it is difficult to apply it to investing or trading. So there are some successful ones. I think Mark Spitznagel was one of them. He wrote a really good book. So I know you guys love it when I give you book recommendations. So one of the best books I've read in the last 4 or 5 years was The Tao of Capital by Mark Spitznagel. And not only does he talk about his philosophy in markets and capitalism, he also talks about the history of libertarian philosophy. And the first libertarian philosophy actually dates back, I think, to Lao Tzu. So Taoism. Taoism is where libertarian philosophy and more common sense was started, with Lao Tzu and Taoism. So many of you guys are not familiar with that, and that book explains it. It's really cool. Dr. 8, Alexander Ovechkin, Avatar, there was no reason for the Fed to stop raising rates. They paused because of the stock market. Yep, we're in agreement. But the Fed is truly worried about breaking something. Asset prices are a big part of it, and it's been this way for years now, where the Fed pays active attention to the stock market and other asset markets. So it's now the stock market behavior is now a very big component of what the Fed decides to do. So Jerome Powell caved. I remember Danielle DiMartino Booth and some of the other experts were saying that Powell was going to be different, that he was going to be similar to Paul Volcker. Well, oh yeah, there was a good interview with Paul Volcker. It's free on YouTube, where this week it was released by Ray Dalio. So Ray Dalio interviews Paul Volcker. He's an old man, and Volcker talks about the stories of some bailouts and stuff. That was interesting hearing about rules changes and bailouts in the past from Paul Volcker and how he wants to try to restore a more functioning, honest, transparent government. But unfortunately, I think things with transparency and honesty in the government are going the other direction. There was that December accounting rules change that one of my listeners sent me. Catherine Austin Fitts has a link to it. It's called FASAB Statement 56, Understanding New Government Financial Accounting Loopholes. So it looks like if the government wants to not release certain financial reports, they can do so because of national security now. So, like I said, guys, this fits with rule number 1 in the rules I came up with, that the government, to save itself, to maintain power or increase power, will change the rules. They will move the goalposts. There's nothing fair about this at all. Peter asked, Jason, given that the Fed is now looking at dropping interest rates and resuming QE, is there not a point of debt saturation where the public is no longer able or willing to take on further debt? Yeah, I think there is a point, because we're seeing, record amounts of credit card debt spiking in the last couple months. The live stream video that I did a couple days ago about the auto loans, how some people their credit rating is totally destroyed. They're 3 months or more late on their auto payments. It's mostly adult Americans 30 years of age or younger. So I think there is a debt saturation point, but like I said, the people in power, the central bankers, the globalists, like the people running the IMF and World Bank and Bank of International Settlements, and these governments can coordinate things with currency swaps, that they could just change the rules. And this is Danielle DiMartino, who talked about this over the summer in one of her speeches, that her contacts at the Fed are openly discussing amongst themselves when a debt jubilee or system reset should be done. But this was inevitable when the dollar went off backing with the gold in 1971. So the people who are saying it was going to happen immediately were wrong, obviously, because the system has endured for decades. But the average American, their wages have not risen since the 70s, since the dollar was severed from gold, a lot of them. Their wages may have risen in nominal value, but in real terms it is not, and their standard of living has been cut. You have a lot of American families now, just to get by, you have the mother and father having to work. They can't be good parents to their kids. A lot of people have health problems because they're working so many hours. They're not eating healthy food. They're not exercising. They're, watching too much TV or playing too many video games. Also, the video game thing is a problem in China too, I hear. An enormous problem. Dr. 8 says the left is insane. By other people's definition, they would be insane, but by their own definition, they're just like evil geniuses. So I would say they're more morally bankrupt. You can call them insane, but I would say they're more morally bankrupt. They have a totally different moral code than a common sense person who takes responsibility for their actions and doesn't want to harm anyone else. So it's called moral relativism. They have a totally different moral code, or immorality. A lot of them don't believe in God. A lot of them are hedonistic behavior. I see it all the time, like either in person, out if I go out, or like on the dating app, some of the crazy stuff that's posted. Just stuff that should not be shared. It's like the younger generation, they're posting stuff on social media that should just not be shared at all. That I would never talk about in public, that is being posted. Andy says they will bankrupt you serfs with inflation. Well, Andy, we are already serfs, and we are being killed with stagflation and taxes every year that go up. So most Americans, unless they have a lot of assets and they have the right job, are already debt serfs or wage slaves, especially ones that are graduating college with massive amounts of student loan debt, and then they're looking at like a minimum wage or slightly above minimum wage job. They're not going to have a good standard of living. And that's why you're seeing in these personal finance articles that people send me and I see sometimes, where like some of these attractive women will marry like a beta male, and they'll find the guy that can pay off their enormous student loan debt, and 5 to 7 years later, they just divorce the guy. And the guy's left holding the bag. He's mentally, emotionally, financially crippled. He's paid off his ex-wife's student loan debt, and the wife has, she's debt-free. She has half his assets or more, depending on which state she's in, and then she's married a better-looking guy that has more money. I'm seeing a lot of personal finance articles like that now in the US. It's scary. Okay, well, this channel is not about talking about dating, even though I have mentioned some dating stories. So that's enough for today. I will talk to you guys later.